Hi, this is my artist in residence with Bayou City Waterkeeper, and this is the report out to share what was part of the residency and how it culminated at the end. So to recap a little bit and provide a little background, this is the project scope for the artisan residency that took place over the past year, focusing on this research question on how can art and technology make urban flooding and watershed protection more accessible and actionable for the people most impacted. So thinking about ways to merge some technical fields and also artistic fields together in a way that speaks to a broader range of people given Bayou City Waterkeeper's focus on reaching, people in the broader Houston area and Galveston Bay and watershed area. And so some outcomes from this project over the last year were to primarily one, design a community data mural or water mural that makes water justice issues around the area easier to understand and therefore act on for the communities most impacted. Because a lot of times either this technical information is in reports that aren't really easy to understand, or people may just not know, what can I do to make a difference? And so by making water justice issues easier to visualize, easier to understand, people can then know, okay, what steps can I take to take action? And so long term, the goal for this project was to help Bayou City Waterkeeper develop new knowledge and serve as a tool for creative community engagement. So the mural now exists as a printed kind of fabric that can be used in a variety of events and can help serve as a more creative and interactive way for conversations to start about what does water justice mean for us in the region and what can we do by actually physically pointing to the different places and different, priorities that might lie there and what we can do. And so the two outcomes out of this overall year residency were to design that water mural, which was informed by community perspectives, taken through a survey and disseminating some zines that were able to get the project out to people, and then capturing those stories in the mural itself. I also based off a lot of the icons and a lot of the kind of stories embedded in the mural based off of just different stories that I've heard through research around Bayou City Waterkeeper's past priorities, around looking into past blogs and just resources on the Bayou City Waterkeeper website, as well as generally different experiences from Houston and what water means to people and just researching that as well. And then that mural was shared at the culminating event in May of 2026, so recently relative to when this is being shared at Armin Bayou Nature Center. And so that was where the final mural was showcased, but it's definitely one that can continue to be shared at other events too. And so to share the mural itself, this is a picture of the mural as it was stood up. As you can see, it's a fabric that can be placed in a variety of areas. So it is intended to be moved around so that it can serve as a piece that starts conversation in different places and different events. I intentionally made it so that it can move around, even though murals are technically by definition um, paintings or art pieces that are on a wall. But I think given the history of murals in Houston, I really wanted to still maintain the spirit of murals, but make it so that it is more accessible to be viewed in a variety of areas, not just in one singular location. And so this is the mural itself. As you can see in the mural, there's a couple different icons throughout the region, but also there are some areas such as the purple areas here, which are the water justice zones that Bayou City Waterkeeper has built on over the last couple of years and also the five critical watersheds around here. And I noticed during the event here that it was really helpful to be able to pinpoint those areas and share both the history of what Bayou City Waterkeeper has done around these priorities and also what Bayou City Waterkeeper is planning to do as well, and kind of pointing people to, okay, how can I get involved? To also pair this with a kind of more broader explanation for people who, may not be able to see this explanation about the mural, may not have been at the culminating event. I also created this story map, which I will now share here as well, that kind of goes through this introduction to the mural around water connecting us all, wanting to create a mural that shows how Houston is both shaped by water in different ways, but also thinking about focusing on um, how can this information around water be more accessible and actionable for the people most impacted. And so this is the result of that. It gets into the mural itself. You can see it here in high definition. So if people want to, view it digitally as well, this is an option. And then there is a map as well of all of the different icons around the mural and kind of showing where they are, what they pointed to. So for example, some were around urban greening, some were around urban food gardens. Others were more just like broader messages around like growth over time, around water being a living archive. So a lot of these icons were very much informed by those stories collected through the community. And so this is the map itself. And people can click on them and learn more about each of the different icons themselves. I also outlined the process and research for creating this mural. So around how the water residency or how the residency built on the water justice zones and that interactive map around flood control data sets and different data sets, just like flood zone maps around EPA environmental justice screening tools, even though those were not formally embedded, but they did inform, some of the process of how this was built. And then just a lot of Bayou City Waterkeeper's history around bi pro advocacy around the five critical wetlands, and just different, resources that I was able to attend. So, for example, I remember very, very early on, I think right before I started the residency, Bayou City Waterkeeper hosted a policy webinar. And one of the facts that really stood out to me was that more than 60% or around 60% of Houston's waterways are currently unsafe for contact recreation. And that was a thread that I actually saw in one of the stories as well, where somebody shared that they really enjoyed being on the water and being able to, enjoy it just and safely. And I thought about, for example, like kayaking as a recreational activity that people enjoy on the water. It was funny or interesting to see it also be an activity at the Arnon Bayou Nature Center that Bayou City Waterkeeper hosted. And so that's actually one of the icons here as well, around clean waterways and wanting to have, these waterways that we see throughout the city and the region being able to actually be accessible for, safe use. And so I used a lot of that information that kind of goes into that research foundation. Then I focused on the community voices and reclaiming our data. This was really important for me throughout the residency in that this wasn't just going to be a mural that was created based off a singular perspective, but really thinking about, okay, what are all the different perspectives that exist in our region and inviting people to, share their inputs and for that to be able to inform what the final mural looked like. And so there were a couple of different events that I attended and collected um, people's perspectives through that. I also created the zine shown here on the right-hand side that people were able to, you know, get either virtually or physically. And with the final survey here to collect input on what water justice means to them. And so those results were also embedded into the final mural and inspired the different icons. And then just working with Bayou City Waterkeeper staff and making sure that it reflected the different values that I first learned about at the beginning of the residency, including interconnectivity, fluidity, bold action, justice, equity, and regeneration. And so I get a little bit more into just listing what's the data behind the map than the actual mural itself, kind of like the picture shared earlier. And then lastly, I close with the water is still rising, but so are we. And so thinking about how this mural can be seen as an exercise of our imagination, where I specifically did not want to focus on, like I know there's a lot of negative impacts that water has had on the Houston area. And a lot of times when we think about environmental injustices, it can be very easy to focus on the harms that have happened and not to, ignore those harms, but I really wanted this mural to be something that speaks to imagining what could be possible and what futures we want for ourselves and really informed by, the people most impacted, not by somebody like top down telling me this is what is possible for Houston, and Galveston too. And so really focusing on this is imagination and exercise and through this piece asking to consider like what if Houston's values ran clean? What if the communities that flooded first were protected? What if people who knew the water best were the ones sharing policy about it? And so thinking about how these questions are necessary to achieve water justice in our region and that we can't build something that we don't first imagine. And so really encouraging people to use this mural as a way to imagine what is possible for our region and then through that imagination think about, okay, how can we reach that possible future? And so that's where this resource closes out with the just different ways that you can do that. So knowing that we need consistent commitments to make imagined futures real. And so I pointed to a couple different kind of calls to action that people can take related to Bayou City Waterkeeper's work. And I point out a bunch of different resources that both informed my building of this mural, but also I think can inform when people see this mural, knowing, oh, here are different resources at Bayou City Waterkeeper that I can, focus on this or take action with this. And so I pointed out protecting the five critical wetlands, demanding clean water. I specifically pointed out here the turning the tide policy agenda that I think was really helpful to help inform some of this. Knowing your flood risk, so sharing also the water justice zone mapper, and then just at the end, a broad call to action around adding your voice and that each of our stories matter in this movement and just encouraging people to bring their full selves. And then with that part, I just shared out Bayou City Waterkeepers Hub for more resources because I think that's something really, really useful for people to be pointed to, especially when they might have different interests around water in the region. And so that was this additional resource that kind of, supplements the mural itself. And lastly, yeah, here were the calls to action. And so that's what I wanted to close the mural with. And I think especially whenever this mural if it's used in in-person events, it can lend itself well to, you know, call start closing out with a call to action or with a like, here's how you can take action. I especially noticed during the final events that people were asking, so how can they get involved? And I think this is one great way to be able to point people to existing initiatives at Bayou City Waterkeeper. And so, yeah, with that, I just want to say thank you for making this residency possible. I really enjoyed the process of designing this throughout a year. And I know there were some, changes and adaptations we had to make as the year went on. And I think that's just the nature of doing work in that is responsive to what comes up. And so I really appreciate this opportunity to create this mural. I hope the mural can serve as a very useful tool in future Bayou City Waterkeeper events, initiatives, and yeah, that it inspires people to get more involved in protecting our waterways in Houston and Galveston. And so thank you so much. And if there are any questions about the mural, just reach out to me. Best email is probably reesasenet0203@gmail.com. And I will also be sharing a link to that story map resource that kind of provides this background as well to the mural. But thank you.